This is the Lecture Center, and we're going to be talking about the role of education. And I think this is very, very important. We need to be talking about this. We haven't been talking about it as much as we should, and it is indeed apropos because of the times that we're in. We are in dire times, and I'm sure that many of you are aware of this. Those of you that are in political circles, or those of you that are listening to politics and following politics, and you know what's going on with the government, and you know what's going on in the real world, you know that in the political, well, I would say the last few election cycles, nobody's been talking about education, and I've been talking about education, and we need to talk about it because it truly is the future. The children are our future. And I don't particularly say that we should just be talking about educating children, although that's where it starts. We also need to be talking about educating adults because we are the ones who lead and guide the children. So I'm going to be touching on quite a few things in this podcast, and I think I'm going to try to delve into everything that I possibly can. It won't be done in this one podcast, but I'm going to try to get into as much as I possibly can. When talking about the role of education, I am going to go into quite a few things, and I'm going to get into that right now. But I guess first we can start with the fact that I got inspired to talk about this by reading, actually, I should say, James Baldwin, his 1960s talk to teachers. And he said a lot of things in that talk, and I actually wrote an essay about it that I'm going to publish on Medium. However, I want to talk to you about what I got from what he said, because I actually agree with what he said. He said that the role of education is to civilize men. But the question I pose is, has education done that? And is it currently functioning to civilize mankind? And that's what we're going to explore today, among other things. And that is the essential question, because we as a people have lost sight of the actual reason why we educate. I can understand that we have believed for so many years that the purpose of education is to get a good job, or to get a job, period. I mean, that's what we've been raised to believe. That's what's been a part of the culture, the Western culture. You get educated, you get that college degree to get a job. And you need to get a good job so that you can support yourself and pay the bills. But this is deeper than that. And this is why I want to talk about it, because I'm so passionate about education, and I really strongly believe that education is so much more than about getting some damn job. Shall I say that we have redefined the purpose of education to reflect a society that we want to have? That's something that I want to explore as well. And there's a new society that we want to have, and this goes beyond the old world, which was where, like I just said, you get a good job if you get a degree. There is another reason why we are educating. It has a lot to do with creating a utopian society, creating a perfect world, creating a world where, the climate is in check, where there's equity, where there's inclusion, where there's belonging. Yes, all of that is the reason for educating for some people. Okay? So as it stands, and I'm going to circle back to that. If the time permits, I'm really going to circle back to that. So as it stands, teachers who now call themselves educators are really not educating. At least I don't think so. And these buildings that students frequent to receive a so-called education are really not institutions of learning. Education has lost its meaning, and teachers have lost their value. I want to explain, I really want to get into this, because what we're witnessing is a total breakdown of contemporary society, in a sense that not only have we gradually become uncivilized, but there seems to be no comprehension of what civility actually is. I really feel that there are reasons for this breakdown. I'm going to list them, and I feel that, number one, this one reason, I shouldn't say this one reason, but the top reason is because of the disintegration of religion and religious teachings. And when I say religion and religious teachings, I'm not necessarily talking about orthodoxy. I am talking about basic teachings, like things that, like, all over the world we know are wrong, like stealing and, killing and things like that. Like the basis of the Ten Commandments. I don't think the Ten Commandments are religious. Some people do. I disagree. So that's one thing. And then the effects of postmodernism and the postmodern era have certainly affected the educational system. And also the failure to cultivate ethical principles. And that can also be grouped with the disintegration of religion and religious teachings. And finally, the failure to comprehend the purpose of education. We really have lost our way. We're doing what we're doing because of tradition. And when we do what we do because of tradition, we're not doing anything based on meaning. And when we don't do things based and rooted in meaning, they no longer have a purpose and they no longer have any value. So before I explain all of this, I want to go back to the initial argument, and it is in reference to human civility or the refinement of mankind. And why I'm arguing that the contemporary man is in need of refinement and that the main role of education is to do so is because I've been in various aspects of education for over 20 years, and the things that I've witnessed have inspired this talk. And also my feelings, my passion for education, friends. I'll say up front, I'll put this out there. I don't have a PhD, but it really doesn't matter because what I have identified is something that PhDs of today and the last 200 years of scholarly studies have failed to see. My life's work in education has been chronicled by my lived experience, and it just doesn't get any better than that. And that's why I stand on my words, and my words, everything I'm telling you, everything I'm going to reveal to you in this podcast is credible. You see, most teachers, or educators as they would like to be called, do very little moving around. The average teacher remains teaching the same subject matter, same grade, and even in the same school for most of his or her career. And this also applies to college professors as well. And the issue here is that those who remain stagnant have no idea what's going on. They're in a box. They're lost in translation. They know what they've heard. The world that they're in never evolves, and they don't grow. And I always say that teaching, like most professions, is evolutionary. And the best and the brightest teachers are those who seek to innovate and evolve. And those individuals are rare. I think that the PhDs thought that if they gave educators professional development, computers and smartboards in classrooms, I think they thought that perhaps that would constitute evolution and growth. But it really doesn't. Evolution is of the mind. It's making new discoveries, and most importantly, it's a contribution to the masses, to the world. How many educators, as they want to be called, are actually making strides? I really think that the PhDs are those who we never see, we never know their names, they're way up, we don't know who they are, have actually contributed to this educational dilemma that over the last 60 to 100 years, yes, that's right, we are now witnessing the adverse effects of. And what we're witnessing in the contemporary world due to educational practice is the dehumanization, demoralization, and indoctrination of students. Now, friends, we know that students cannot read and write. We know that the stats are out there. Students are inarticulate, and many are suffering from a plethora of learning disabilities that are virtually unknown just 25 years ago. It seems that on a daily basis, there's a new diagnosis. And what I find particularly interesting is that these diagnoses are really affecting the cognitive development of children. In essence, what we're talking about is something they don't want to discuss, and that is mental retardation. They dislike that word and they say that it's derogatory, but it's not. It is the only word that reveals the nature of these cognitive disabilities, and we don't need to revert to the usage of euphemisms because it's time to grow up and deal with reality. And the reality, friends, is that teachers and administrators are facing dire challenges and they have no support. I mentioned learning disabilities, and it would be criminal if I didn't mention the worst of all. Behavioral challenges. Ooh, yeah. I witnessed this. I know what that's all about. Let's get right to it. Let's get to the elephant in the room. They don't want to talk about this either. And I noticed that in the impoverished ghettos, some of the schools, I'm not laughing. Some of the schools were dilapidated, unkempt, and teachers spoke to students as if they were their friends. This could be part of the problem, friends. They often use the word y'all. You might say, well, what is wrong with that? I'm getting to it. But as I said before, the most disturbing was student behavior. Students were roaming the hallways, walking in and out of classrooms. Bathrooms were often locked. That's right. Locked latrines. Because of the loitering, because of the hanging out, because of the just doing things in the bathrooms. And you can imagine what they were doing. Yes, sexual acts, all kinds of things that they should not have been doing. Fights were prevalent. Nobody wanted to do any schoolwork. People don't do schoolwork. They don't do schoolwork. Students constantly called out of the classroom, making it impossible to teach a lesson. But yet the admin insisted that teachers come in with a structured lesson, even though they were well aware that there was no teaching taking place at all. Some of these teachers were young, fresh out of college, many from the Midwest or northwestern parts of the United States, walking into classrooms that they just had no idea what they were getting to. It was a complete culture shock, and actually a scary encounter for many, because they did not know how to handle the aggressive outbursts of these children. And don't get me wrong, let me tell you something. I've seen it all. I've seen it in private and independent schools. I've seen all it's everywhere now. The fact is, none of these educators had been given the tools to deal with this. And it has to do with the fact that the top down didn't have the tools, and they still don't, to deal with this. I want to go into why the intelligence has really no method to stimulate a child's mind to be educated. Because when we see that there are behavioral problems, when we see that children can't sit still, when we see that children are aggressive, all of these different problems that we're facing in the inner cities, and now we're seeing this is spreading out like a disease. It's just spreading into the independent realm, private realm. We have to ask ourselves what the problem is. And I've talked about it. The problem is that a lot of these children have developmental disabilities. And you also use the phrase, and I just did, mental retardation. But we're gonna get back into that, because I want to. We talked about these challenges, but I really want to talk about understanding the purpose of education to begin with. Because if we can all come to an agreement about the purpose of education, maybe we can understand what we need to do to remedy the issues that I just mentioned. So I said at the top that the purpose of education is to civilize mankind, but I want to expound on this and say that education must function to ensure the prosperity of mankind, and that it cultivates the seed of spiritual evolution, which actually spawns cultural innovation. And when we talk about evolution, I'm actually really talking about advancement. And I think that anyone would agree that our survival depends on our ability to prosper well into the next century and beyond. But how can we ensure that if we reduce learning to standardized testing, political indoctrination, and even activism? And I tell you, the truth is that the majority of parents have no idea what their children are being taught, especially in the humanities studies. I've learned the concerns of the middle class and well-to-do are that their children are going to college. That's all they care about. They don't really care about it. They send their kids to the ones that can afford it, rather. These private schools that are like they call them gateway schools, where they can just go straight from those schools into the Ivy League. That's all they care about. And then you have, the underclass. They could care less whether their kids go to college. They don't care about anything at all. And I can understand why parents would want their children to attend college, and especially the Ivy League. I get it. And it's for the purpose of getting a good job, getting into a Fortune 500 or whatever. I mean, that's it. And then live a good life and not be poor. That's a nightmare to have to struggle. Nobody wants their children to have to struggle if they don't have to. However, education, unfortunately, has become a cash cow for those who are stakeholders in it. I'm talking about the ones who run the colleges, the charters, and the public schools. People are seriously pocketing off of the business of education. And it's not the teachers. And it appears that the devaluing of education and teaching has come at a serious cost, and the desire for profit and not the fostering of human civility, I feel, is just sinister. I feel that it is the moral obligation of those who head schools to work not for profit, but for the edification of humankind. It's not a choice. It's your moral duty. Educators are servants. We're all servants. That is why we're on earth. Oh my God, you can't take your money with you. Money is a tool used to construct a world that will cultivate the seed of growth, advancement, evolution, innovation. So the standards must be heightened on all fronts, not just for teachers, but also for students. There must be clear expectations for students on day one. Teachers must adhere to higher standards, not just educational, but even with something as meticulous as their appearance in the classroom. And people may think, well, what difference does it make? Who cares about that? Oh, it makes all the difference. Kids see everything. Teachers, I feel, should be dressed impeccably. Their posture should be upright. Their desk ought to be neat and organized. What must be understood is that children are impressionable, and they take notice of the most minute of details. And all of it makes a difference in their life, whether we realize it or not. When a student observes the posture and dress of his teacher, he interprets that as a person who takes good care of himself. And those who do this exercise love. And love is an active force. And it's a force that actually is cultivated in our soul. This is where it starts. It starts with learning to take care of ourselves, both inside and out. And it also starts by being an example, because what this really is about is knowing that you are valued. We have to know that we are valued, and we have to learn to value ourselves. You see, the way we carry ourselves is what we teach. Teachers have to learn that you're not just teaching subjects. You have to put your whole self, your heart, into what you're doing in order to be truly effective in the life of your students. And nobody, I'm telling you, nobody can succeed at this unless they're in touch with who they are inwardly. I really feel that there must be a total overhaul of education as we know it. But friends, which brings me to another point. One of the other issues that I'm having, and I have many issues, I'm only getting into a few here, with the current educational system, is the failure to cultivate ethical principles. In what seems like the days of antiquity, man derived his sense of principle by his religious and philosophical teaching. But these days have since disappeared, and in its place is a new culture that has falsified the original teachings that at one time engendered virtue. The principle that a man adapts in his life must come from his own virtue. And the highest virtue is love. And love originates in man's thoughts about himself. Love is revealed in a man of integrity. And it's about a goodness to oneself. And in order to cultivate morally upright action, we have to learn to live by our own code of moral conduct that dictates that we treat our own person with love and care. However, unfortunately, most of us live in a state of constant self-condemnation. We beat ourselves up on a daily basis about the most trivial matters. Furthermore, we're self-loathing, expressing disdain at our appearance. We compare ourselves to others who we think look better, have more money, a better life, etc. We tend to we're overconsumptuous. We're eating, we're drinking, we're shopping too much, we're slobs, we're gluttonous, we're ungrateful for what we have. How can any one of us love or be loved with these despicable thoughts? I don't say this to make anyone feel ashamed, because I'm guilty of almost all of the aforementioned. Friends, I am not perfect. Many of our vices that plague us have become a burden that we just can't shake. And this burden impedes on our ability to practice the much needed self-care that we so desire. And all of it seems insufferable at times. And the question is, how do we learn to love ourselves? I want to make clear that we have created a world, a society, if you will, that has made the least valuable the most valuable. We have put all else above the self. The self is our self, and I call that the capital letter I, because each and every one of us possesses an I. That I is the center of our existence. It is our identity, and that's why it can't be neglected. But this is the very thing that we've done. We've made it corporeal. We've made the material life of vanities and superficialities supersede our inner man, our inner spiritual life. You see, that is where the ethical principles are birthed, within the inner man, the spirit, and that really is the heart. If all that matters to you is your appearance, material wealth, fame, seeking attention, clout, status, power, all of that, it's because you failed to develop principles that will guide your life. You don't care about the inner man. You only care about the outside. And this is where most people are. When we turn on that boob tube, the so-called reality shows, game shows, and even talk shows display nothing but a clown society. And I often relegate these shows to a modern-day vaudeville. And you know what I'm referring to. The Masked Singer. That's the worst show, The Masked Singer. A program like that has no value. And it comes from a mind that has no value. Why? Because that mind and the people that are behind all of it are not concerned with their duty to society, but their own self-aggrandizement and self-appeasement. Can we understand that we all have a duty to society at large? I mean, think about this. If your main goal is to be like the Kardashians, I assure you that you would in no way, shape, or form be of service to society or even yourself, because your goal is to make money and get famous. There's no value because you're not working for the advancement of yourself or your fellow man. I'm telling you, without the cultivation of principles, man cannot align himself with the laws of God and nature. And very little is known about these laws because PhDs in the arts do not even see the value of learning about man and his relation to nature. And that's because they know nothing of God or man or even the arts. What they know is what they teach. And that's how to read and extrapolate quotes, theses, and facts from various literary works. And they call this literary analysis. But see, I have a problem with that because you can't analyze a work of literature void of confronting the inner conflicts that all of us endure. In other words, there must be a tangible connection to what the student is reading to himself. You see, friends, literature, just like all works of real art, contain in it the essence of the artist's soul. The artist, the writer, the singer, whomever, bears his soul in the pages of the book or on the canvas. And there is always a conflict in nature. And we know this because man is nature and nature is man. You see, the educators of old were akin to nature and understood her laws. That is why what we consider classical works of literature or of art have held their value. But in other walks of life, they have not because of the countercultural movement. And this movement, otherwise known as the post-modernist, is the mother of the gender, Black, LGBTQ+, and other cultural studies. I want to discuss this because it's the key to understanding what education is today as opposed to what it once was. And friends, the effects of this postmodern era are many. It's not, postmodernism, friends, it's not a ubiquitous term that has a great significance beyond the realm of educators and philosophers, and that's why I think it's absolutely necessary to talk about it. In short, postmodernism is a subset of philosophy centered on the rejection of cultural, artistic, and overall societal norms that have shaped the Western world as we know it. And those who subscribe to postmodernism do not accept truths that most of humanity has accepted since the beginning of time. Postmodernists reject gender norms, and they assert that gender and sexuality is on a spectrum. Basically, according to the postmodernists, you can be whatever you want to be. If you want to be a man, you can be a man. If you want to be a woman, if you want to be a furry, you can be a furry. So basically, this is the negation of science and nature. Since all sciences are fundamentally rooted in nature, or the laws of nature, postmodernism rejects all of that. Postmodernists also reject God and moral law or divine law. In the eyes of the postmodernists, God is non-existent, and therefore morality is non-existent. This challenges us. This challenges the educators, because how can we teach without something rudimentary? You see, postmodernism is the complete annihilation of the foundation on which all reality is based. It really is a nihilist vision of the world, and it is infused in school curricula throughout the country. This is dangerous, friends. Postmodernists assert that a transgender woman can give birth. Well, if that's the case, then how do we properly define a physiological woman, biological woman? Should we change the definition to fit the postmodernist viewpoint when we know that their view of the world is a world that has no meaning at all? Why is it that we accept what it is they say? This is what we've done. This is not something that just started. It began with the removal of philosophy, Christian studies, civics, and even geography from the curricula. Children these days can't even name the 7 continents. They have no idea how to read a map. Christian studies provide an ethical grounding and an understanding of not just Christian values, but human values that can benefit all of us. Philosophy, the low-hanging fruit of the bunch, was demerited years ago due to its usefulness. Of course, I found solace in philosophy. However, these days, philosophers have no merit in the world at all. Friends, it might be of interest to you that there is a man whom they deem a philosopher, and he's a champion of the postmodernist movement, and his name is Paulo Freire. And yes, he's Brazilian, and he wrote a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I think it's imperative that I mention this book because it is to this day highly influential in education. And in order to understand what our children are being taught in school, we must know about Freire. His works provided the framework for what we now call CRT, which is critical race theory. Freire was influenced by the German philosopher Karl Marx and based his educational model on the perceived hierarchy of the rich, known as the oppressor, and the poor, the oppressed. You see, education, this is what he believed, should be approached in a way would allow students to be world changers. He thought that it made no sense to be educated within an oppressor's system. Therefore, what merit did reading and writing have in the life of a student if that student would be subjected to the slavery and poverty at the hands of his oppressor, which would be the rich or the wealthy or the affluent at the top of the hierarchy? One reason why students are illiterate, and we talked about this at the top, is because reading is no longer fundamental. Progressive education has become rooted in activism and social justice. School is really no longer about academics. It's about examining what they perceive are injustices in the world and actively working to change them. This kind of change is really by any means necessary. They have many modes and methods to their madness. And however they think they can create this utopia society that they want to create, they're going to implement their plan, especially with the government's help. So they've taken many radical approaches thus far. I want to give you an example of some of the books that I stumbled upon, and I didn't, I'm saying stumbled upon, but I didn't actually stumble upon them, that were on a high school reading list. And this is going to give you an idea of exactly what they're doing and what they want your children to learn in school. The Power of the Powerless by Václav Havel. The Purpose of Power, How We Come Together When We Fall Apart by Alicia Garza. Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. The Revolution Will Not Be Funded by Women of Color Against Violence. Ideas for Action by Cynthia Kaufman. So, we can already tell by the titles what these books are about. Friends, you already know where they're going with this. I mean, they're talking about power and the powerless and radicals and all of this. Friends, this is all about activism. This is all about what your kids, if this is what you sent, look, you sent your kids to school to get an education, and this is what they're teaching them. How to be a radical. How to be a radical activist. That's what they're teaching your children. And they do it at the lower level on a subtle level and gradually work their way up to this. I told you these are high school books. So they gradually work their way up to this. But this is what they want. They want to create a society where they're going to, well, I'll say this. They want to educate, in quotes, your children on how to deconstruct the society at large. That's what this is all about. So this all started really with Marx. Paulo Freire was his, a contemporary, and he also believed in the ideology of Marx, and he wholeheartedly spoke about it and wrote about it, and this is what he felt. Freire really believed that school was where we could tackle the war on oppression. So I'd like to ask you a question. What is the difference between indoctrination and teaching? We hear that word indoctrination all the time. We hear it. Some of us, we don't, because we're under a rock. But I want to ponder on that, because what makes men believe that poverty is an injustice and that all men should be on an equal footing, and also that wealth comes from oppressing the impoverished? What makes men think that? They considered Paulo Freire, and they still do, as a philosopher, but I say he was not. I say this because his view of the world was shaped not by his own critical analysis or study, but really by Karl Marx. He was indoctrinated. He did not look at the world through his own eyes. He didn't critically think. He didn't analyze. He didn't do any of that. He didn't. Because Marx appealed to something within him. Something within him that he really wanted. And it was the same thing that Marx wanted. And it was power, friends. You see, critical thinking is akin to analytical thinking. It requires a mind that can discern truth from falsehood. Therefore, if we're not teaching, this is part of the teaching. If we're not teaching students how to do that, there's no way children, or anyone for that matter, can understand the world around them. And what critical thinking is really about is the ability to recognize what is real. Friends, if you've heard nothing, if you didn't retain anything that I've said, please heed this. A person who knows what is real as opposed to what is not cannot be brainwashed. The person who is anchored in reality is the reality himself. Listen to what I'm telling you. Reality has to do with the ability to discern truth from falsehood. See, truth really means reality. And the definition of mental illness really has to do with people being detached from reality. That's a simple definition. So when we talk about all of this and we say to ourselves, oh my God, this is ridiculous. What is this they're teaching? How do these people see the world? These people see the world through a dismal lens, through a lens that they believe that everything of the world, well, they see that they're fighting some kind of evil force in the world. But what they don't know is they themselves are that force. You see, really, this doesn't have anything to do with the world. It has everything to do with character. And this is why education needs to focus on character development. You see, people that are willing to accept Freire, Marx, and leaders of the social justice movement want power. They want to be on a moral high horse. They want to be the ones to tell people what to do. They love authority and power. And these people are diminished souls. They're really diminished. They want to be revered. And these people are also terribly arrogant. I said it, friends, the evil that they perceive in the world is the evil within their own heart. These people I call moralists, and they actually believe that they should take the matters of the world into their own hands. They don't believe in divine justice. They don't believe in nature. They don't believe in God because they're nihilists. That's what it means to be a nihilist. These people have no faith in anything at all. And so they are the superpower. They are the ones. Let's see how much time we have. This is going really long, but I'm not going to say too much more about this, but I want to get into this on the next podcast because there's more I have to say because, I read this book and this really has to do with education and being a solutionary and all of this stuff. And this really would work well with this podcast. And we need to continue to talk about this because I'm telling you, people think they can solve the problems that we're having right now with legislation and policy. No, friends. We've got to get to the root of a problem in order to solve it. And the root of the problems that we're having right now in the Western world with the destruction of our society, our civilized society, it started with education. And therefore, if it started with education, the only way to solve the problem is with education. So I want you to join me next time so we can talk about this. I'm all about solvency. Until next time.